From Washington, this is the HPS Macrocast with Hamilton Place Strategies and Markets Policy Partners.
Good morning. It's Friday, June 29th, and we're back with the Macrocast. I'm back this week after getting a week off the Macrocast. It's good to be back with you. It's Tony Fratto. I'm coming to you from Western Pennsylvania. John Fagan and Brendan Walsh from Markets Policy Partners. Guys are in the DC area. We have my great old friend, John Dick from CivicScience with us today. John's also in the Pittsburgh area. He's actually, in fact, he's sporting Steelers cap this morning, which I'm happy to see him representing.
I'm not that old, Tony.
Yeah, we're contemporaries, even though I'm older. John, actually, one of the great things about John is the CEO of a really wonderful company called CivicScience based in Pittsburgh, and it's these brilliant PhDs who figured out how to do online digital insights and surveys. I'll let John describe it a little bit more when we get into it. In the second segment, we're going to spend with John talking about the insights that he's seeing, especially from consumers, and consumers are going through one of these great changes. John and I were with each other the other day and we're saying this is what they're going through is the greatest behavioral social experiment of all time. And so we're going to see what we can glean from that and what it means for the economy and how we think about the economy going forward. John and I got to work on something we partnered on together and have been partners since, is on our HPS CivicScience Economic Sentiment Index that we built about 8 years ago now, John, right?
Yeah, 2012. It's hard to believe.
Yeah. Which is incredibly sensitive. If you haven't seen it, check it out. We can give you the website coordinates for it, and you can find it on on Twitter, the ESICS handle. But we've seen it's a very sensitive, smart look at how people are thinking about the economy right now. Good snapshot and their thoughts on the future. So we'll get in the second segment, talk more about that. But first, we're going to talk with John and Brendan about where the markets are this week. And John, it looks like we've seen a little retrenchment in equity markets this week, where S&P and the Dow coming off their highs. They seem to have settled into some kind of range where the look to me is that market participants have recognized that while we're not going to be crashing at the bottom, it's going to be with us for a long time. Like, we've got a good long road ahead of us of dealing with COVID and what that means for a lot of firms. Is that the way you're reading it?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. That I think is pretty accurate. And what we've seen in financial markets over the last couple of weeks is really almost like a struggle over the controls with the bulls and the bears are kind of the classic motif in equity market. But there's clearly on one side of the equation, there are continued hopes, despite what we've seen this week in terms of coronavirus data in the U.S. and some other hotspots around the world. Certainly continued hopes for a perhaps uneven but overall recovery trajectory for the U.S. and global economy here, and obviously underpinning that is the massive support on the monetary and fiscal sides, whether it's, we saw last week just a flood of central banks coming out and in their meetings and re-upping, augmenting, increasing stimulus and supportive efforts. And the Fed has certainly been leading the pack there. And this week we've seen more crosstalk about what is coming down the pike in terms of the next U.S. fiscal relief package. This would be phase 4, I guess. We've almost lost count of how many phases. So on one side, you've got optimism for the recovery underpinned by very magnanimous and muscular stimulus on the fiscal and monetary side. On the other side, you've got COVID, and COVID is clearly showing itself to be a very tricky proposition in terms of reopening. In states that have forged ahead with the reopening, whether you're talking about Florida, Arizona, Texas, some of the more bold states in terms of opening up economic activity, have seen increasing numbers. And we saw this week, we've seen Texas, Florida, California registering record number of new cases a day. We've seen the US tallies tilting back upward again. We've seen, in previous weeks, sort of a semantic argument about whether this is a second wave or a first wave. Those have kind of died down. It to us, that was really missing the point here, which is, reopening efforts are challenging, and this uneven and fitful ability for, some areas to be coping with it, while other areas are having an outbreak. There's just, it's just a very, very tricky virus. It's highly infectious, very obviously. And this is, as you said, something we're going to be grappling with for a while. That doesn't mean that sentiment is like rock bottom, but it's much more nuanced than the one-way market that we've seen over the past few months.
Yeah, but we're also seeing it seep into actually hard data. So Black Knight, which is a mortgage data company, they saw mortgages in forbearance surge 79,000, and that basically reversed all of the improvement we saw in the previous couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So I think the market is also grappling with the fact that the first couple of months we did a monstrous stimulus, and the consumer wasn't terrible off, but now that is starting to roll off. We'll see if we get CARES 2.0 and what that looks like, but people had enough money to pay their rent or their mortgage or their credit card bill for the most part for the first couple months of this. That is starting to trickle off. And like Yelp yesterday said that they have 140,000 small businesses that are registered not open. So that's the reality on the ground. And that's a lot of people that aren't going back to work anytime soon.
Yeah, and Brent, I'm glad you brought up the forbearance number. I'm going to get into that. I think Yelp also estimated that something like 40% of that group are probably never going to reopen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're not open by now, I'm not sure how you're going to survive.
Yeah, on the forbearance issue, that I saw that same data, and it really struck me as well. And so, I mean, you gave the raw number of 79,000 new applications for forbearance. Just to put that in perspective, they're estimating right now that around 9% of every mortgage is in forbearance.
Yeah.
So it's not 1 out of 10. It's nearly 1 out of 10 of all mortgages in America are in forbearance. And so what that means is that 1 out of 10 people. But I should say that number is usually like sort of delinquent numbers. People not making their mortgage payments since the Great Recession has been somewhere around 2% or lower.
Yeah,
it's a very low, very, very low number. So that's a significant number of people who are asking to delay their payments for their mortgage, which the CARES Act allowed them to do. What that means is that they are experiencing sufficient economic, income impairment. They don't feel like they can pay their mortgage, or they don't feel like they ought to pay their mortgage right now because they're feeling uncertain about it. That also delays, though, a cost for them, because that forbearance doesn't mean you wipe out the payment. It means that you get to put off the payment until later, and it accrues interest while you're putting off that payment. So it adds a burden to those homeowners. But to me, like
the rental statistics are similar also, where you had a forbearance on rent. So it's not double the number, but that's probably increases that number about a third too. That you're going to have to make up your rent payments in the future.
Right. So the two signals those are two signals I was looking at. That was one of them, was this forbearance number.
Yeah.
And the second is just, we saw again like another 1.5 million people filing for.
That was shocking.
Claims yesterday.
And not much of a decrease in continuing claims also.
No. So it's those are. Look, and so I think that was the 14th week in a row of more than 1 million people filing for initial claims. So that's a deep hole. You talked about John talked about the global numbers. I saw that IMF came out with their updated World Economic Outlook earlier this week. Geeta Gopinath, the chief economist over at the IMF, estimated the economic hole. That's something, if it returns according to what their expectations are predicting, about her number was somewhere around 4.9%. So 4.9% decline in global growth in 2020, and rebounding somewhere around about 5% in 2021, representing a 12.5 trillion hole in lost output. So that's an enormous hole. And she also estimated that the fiscal response, which has been like remarkably strong, it's like the strongest globally, especially in the United States and developed economies, about $10 trillion in fiscal support out there, and probably more to come. But that doesn't really fill that hole in the you don't do straight math on that. There's a lot of economic opportunity that has been that will have been missed, and a lot of people put in really difficult situations that will affect their economic activity for a very long time.
Exactly. And also in terms of economic outlook. So last night we got the Fed stress test for all of our big banks, and I think digging through their assumptions. So they want to give the most dour scenario, which was kind of a W. And basically our banks passed but didn't pass. So they don't want you buying back stocks, and they're also hesitant about the dividends on some of these guys. So, but I mean, I think in the big picture, none of our banks are, even in this dour scenario, going to go under or have to be bailed out like they were in 2008. But the Fed is telling you we're not through this, and I think the mortgage data shows the worst is yet to come, especially for the defaults on subprime loans, on credit card, on mortgages.
Yeah, this was the framework that we'd set up from the beginning of this crisis, which was it'll start with a liquidity shock, and then we'll move to a slower moving solvency issue. And that solvency issue really is dependent on how long the tail of the coronavirus is and how long these effects last. Carmen Reinhart, the new chief economist for the World Bank, came out to make the important distinction this week that a rebound is not a recovery. You're going to get a reflexive rebound, but that doesn't mean you have recovered, or you can draw a straight line to back straight up to where you were to recover all the losses.
No, you're right. I mean, it's just math. When you go down 100%, the first one on a recovery, on a percentage-wise, is going to seem big, but it really isn't.
Yeah, and one of the other pieces of news we got last night, Nike came out, and they provided their fourth quarter fiscal numbers, and they surprised with a quarterly loss. And the reaction that I had was that was a surprise. The idea that they were going to be pulling internet sales to offset the closed stores and that sort of thing. I think there's that's discretionary retail has performed very, very well, and we've seen the ETF for discretionary retail is now positive on the year. Mm-hmm. And Nike shares were flat on the year. And I think that, there's a decent amount of good news in the price, and we're going to be going into an earnings season where the visibility for these numbers is historically low. So it's a very interesting time, and people are going to be reassessing on the fly here.
It is. And we're talking about it from an investor standpoint about reassessing, an investor can move money from sector to sector. A real concern, and the kind of thing that we're going to talk to John Dick about is, people can't just move from sector to sector. Like you can't say that, yesterday you were a hospitality worker, and tomorrow you're going to be a retail worker, or you're going to go from serving food in a hotel to driving a truck, because that's where the shift happens. And trucking is not, shipping.
Or become a nurse,
right? Shipping is done really well. We need a lot of truck drivers, but these aren't interchangeable, and it causes a lot of concern for people and how they think about things, and how they think about even if you're sitting here, I'm sitting here in Pennsylvania, and how do I feel about the world when I see, it's not impacting me directly in Florida, Arizona, Texas, California, and the Carolinas, but I see it every day, and it affects my thinking, and it makes me worry about what the future is going to be.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that later. The media does not recognize state lines, right? I mean, people are seeing the news in Florida, whether they're in, Connecticut or Pennsylvania, and it's affecting their fears and their behaviors big time. There's an absolute ripple effect of that.
That's a nice segue into that, John. Why don't we take a break right now and come back? And I'd love to talk about that and get into just the way people are, what you're seeing about the way people are thinking about their personal lives and how they think about the broader economy. You're listening to the HPS Macrocast.
Every 2 weeks, HPS measures U.S. adults' feelings and expectations for the economy. The HPS CivicScience Economic Sentiment Index accurately measures movements in overall national economic sentiment and provides a more sophisticated alternative to existing economic sentiment indices. To learn more, contact us through hamiltonplacestrategies.com.
All right, back on the Macrocast. John Dick from CivicScience is with us, our partner in building the Economic Sentiment Index. John, so much of how this economy is working, is going to work, depends on the confidence of people to get out there and go out there and be back and be economic actors. And one of the reasons, one of the things we wanted to look at with the Economic Sentiment Index is how it affects people's decisions to go out and make big purchases like cars and houses, the big investments that they make in their lives. Most of the money they're spending those on everyday stuff. And like, we've never had sort of this situation before where they were shifting the way that they were spending and maybe even the amounts that they were spending. But what are your insights right now on the way people are thinking about, their willingness to go out and be, economic actors?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's obviously changing by the day. You mentioned earlier, we are essentially a survey company. We just have a really novel way of going about it. We do it at a huge amount of scale. So we're doing about 200 million polls a month at this point. And it allows us to really see a bunch of intersections of things when you have that much data, sort of we like to say everything affects everything. And so we're always looking for these sort of external forces or unintuitive forces that are impacting maybe a particular thing that we're looking at. And with close to 1 billion of those polls under our belt since COVID started, we're seeing some three things really matter. Well, first of all, let me say this: nothing is going to have a greater impact on the economic recovery than the consumer. More than any politician, more than any state government, more than any financial decision, more than any company. Mm-hmm. Right? The consumer is going to make the call. Consumers are doing a calculus, consciously or not, in their head every minute of every day, measuring the difference between their desire for normalcy and their fear for their safety, period, right? And that's guiding things. And we see three themes that are guiding that calculus. One is macroeconomic sentiment, right? Their view of their personal financial situation, their job security, and so forth. Mm-hmm. The second one is sort of what we call like safety and proximity. So do I know people who've had the coronavirus? Do I live in an area that has it? Am I in an at-risk population, right? That's a big one. And the third one, which is probably the most pernicious and maybe usurping the other two as the most predictive, is political tribalism, which is probably no surprise to anybody here who spends 5 seconds on Facebook or Twitter. It supersedes geography, in fact, right? So we know that political tribalism aligns closely to like regionality. So we know people in urban areas tend to be more liberal, people in rural areas tend to be more conservative. And of course, people in those areas then are behaving differently. Rural areas are seeing more people go out to restaurants and so on and so forth. So but when you look at the cocktail of those three things, we see obviously a ton of really interesting kind of trends. But what the one right now, which I think dovetails with what you guys were saying in the first segment, is caution is now beginning to return as a prevailing force over desire for normalcy. And how do we see that? Questions we ask people about their comfort level returning to stores and restaurants has plateaued and begun to backpedal in the last 2 weeks. Yeah. And that would concern us. So what we see, so think of a multiple choice question. How comfortable are you returning to restaurants? I'm comfortable now. I'll be comfortable in a month. I'll be comfortable in 4 months. I'll be comfortable in 6 months. The group of people who say I'm comfortable returning to restaurants now has flattened after skyrocketing over the last 6 to 8 weeks. And it's flattened and maybe even started to turn down a little bit. The bigger number is the group of people who say it's going to be 4 to 6 months before I feel comfortable returning to a restaurant and store. And those have climbed pretty dramatically in the last 10 days. And that's independent of geography, as we were saying before the last segment ended.
John, when you say independent of geography, you mean like parts of the country or urban, rural?
A little bit of both. I was going to say more parts of the country initially. We're still certainly seeing people in the more rural parts of the country that are less cautious because they don't know anyone who, hey, I don't know anyone who's had this disease. I don't see it anywhere, right? And of course they're in that sort of political tribe that has been told by the media that they consume not to worry about this, right, for right or wrong, right? And so that's impacting it. But region of the U.S., because we're doing that nationwide polling, we can cut it by regions of the U.S., but it doesn't matter if you live in Pennsylvania. When you see what's happening in Florida, it makes you want to stay home because you say, I don't want to be those people, right?
That's a question I was really curious about because I noticed that. So I'm in one of those areas, right? I'm sitting here in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, that has had, I think, one COVID death, maybe 50 cases, some really light touch here. Now, I will say everybody here, most people, you go in stores, people are wearing their masks, they're distancing for the most part. Outside is a little bit different, but for the most part, they seem to be pretty disciplined. It's not because they're seeing a lot of cases here, right? I mean, right. They're watching the news and they're seem to be doing pretty well about following the guidance.
Yeah, I mean, and every once in a while we'll see the exceptions that prove the rule a little bit, right? That as much as say the political tribal forces tend to impact people's behaviors. And I know there was a lot of talk about the K-pop and Gen Z ruse around the president's rally last week, but the truth of the matter is he filled an arena 1/3 full because even his own supporters who've been told not to fear this virus were like, nah, I'm not going into an arena with 19,000 people.
For all the criticism that I hear, yes, I do hear it here about criticism of the governor here and others about these tyrannical governors who shut down the economy. The truth is consumers shut down the economy themselves.
No question about it.
Well before any shutdown orders came from government.
Yeah, well, and the flip side of that, which is a little bit ironic, is when you study sort of people's apprehension about getting into restaurants and stores, a lot of it, particularly in places like Florida, and we have quantitative and qualitative data to support this, a lot of it consumers are saying, I'd love to go back into a restaurant and store, but all these other people are flaunting and ignoring the social distancing best practices, so I'm not going to do it. I mean, and the irony is those were the people who were yelling and screaming to reopen the economy, the sort of economic social justice warriors, and they're the ones actually hurting the recovery because they're scaring other people away from spending their money.
Yeah, it's a great point. Because if you're in a place that is following it and you go to a restaurant, it's actually not a very enjoyable experience. It's masked and it's dystopian. Or you're in a place that no one's following it and you're scared for your life. So either way, you're like, I'll just wait till it's over and just eat at home,
Yeah, I think it puts state governments and state departments of health in a tough situation because they're saying we're going to allow these restaurants to be open because we've made the determination that the public health risks are manageable enough given the economic upside, right? It's not the state government saying we believe it's recommended for you to go out into those places, but they can't say that because then why open them in the first? If the state says we're going to open restaurants, but we highly recommend you don't go to them, right? Like. But that's sort of what the underlying medical advice is saying. Yeah. I think so many consumers are able to discern that from their own, right? If they look past what maybe cable news network or whatever is telling them, what sort of driving their narrative, then they actually do their own homework. They kind of reach that conclusion on their own. But it is fascinating to watch it, sort of to bring it back to because I know your audience is sort of very market oriented. We can play those scenarios out from the tribal factors and the safety factors and so on. And we can play it through industry categories that are excelling or not because of COVID, and all the way down into individual companies. Like if you looked at the difference between Lowe's and Home Depot's most recent earnings, and Lowe's were superior. A lot of that is because you think about where Lowe's stores tend to be located relative. Home Depot tends to be a bit more urban, closer to urban centers. Lowe's tends to be a bit more rural to suburban and attract a different type of customer. And you can almost see that play out in there was no sort of marketing or promotional thing that either of those companies did. It was just that their sort of core customer fits the archetype of people who feel more comfortable going out to shop in stores. Right. Yeah. And you can look at the difference between a Chick-fil-A and Popeyes and see the same thing. Right. And it's just very easy line traced back to what we know about the archetype of their consumer.
It's fascinating. Some of the questions that we've had and we've been talking about here, which I'd love to get your thoughts on, is we've been trying to think of what are some of the things that might be permanent shifts in the way people conduct themselves. Looking at things like ordering from, right. So, ordering from Amazon or Walmart instead of going to those stores, streaming rather than going into a movie theater, ordering food rather than going into a restaurant, driving relative to public transportation. Are you seeing, now we have seen the hit that each of those sectors has taken in this period. Do you get a sense that any of them are permanent? And one of the things is, obviously, a lot of consumers have been exposed to streaming because they've been forced to, because you can't get into a theater, right?
Right.
So has that caused a shift, in a permanent shift that you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just answered the question. It's been an accelerant. There's very little evidence in 10 years of us studying these things that anything backslides, right? Like that kind of trend. Mm-hmm. The one you didn't mention, which I think is the most impactful and probably the biggest leap forward that will be here forever, is telemedicine, telehealth. It's just been staggering, the increase, because what's fascinating about telehealth is that prior to COVID, the people that did it were younger, more tech savvy. But meanwhile, the people who are probably the biggest sort of consumers in the healthcare market are the older Luddite kind of consumers who were probably intimidated by the idea of a virtual doctor visit. Well, they were then given no choice, right? So it's been a force function to bring the largest sector of the healthcare population into this virtual experience. And frankly, they've had a really good experience with it. Yeah. And have realized, like, hey, it really wasn't that hard. It wasn't anything to be afraid of. And I think that shift is absolutely here to stay, because who wants to sit, first of all, in a socially distanced world, who wants to sit in a waiting room, right, next to 5 other people that might be sick? Who wants to bring their kids to the doctor when they don't have to, right? Yeah. And so the ripple effects of that could be, we think there's going to be a huge surge of at-home tech in healthcare, measurement, diagnostic devices, things that we'll all have in our homes so that we can more virtually communicate with a doctor. That's the one. I believe that is going to be the biggest sort of profound kind of new trend that emerges out of this. But all the others that you mentioned are spot on.
That's a wonderful insight, and it's and that's one of those things actually that should actually raise the productivity of doctors' offices also, right? It should be able to handle a lot more cases.
Sure.
If you're doing telemedicine, you get a little bit more. If you're using at-home tech for monitoring, you get to monitor actually a whole lot more,
right? Sure.
More, longer period of time, so you get to see a little bit movement on it. So it's one of those things that should increase productivity, reduce costs, and improve health outcomes. Those are all really good things.
Bing, bing, bing. Yep.
Anything? Oh, sorry, John. Anything?
Go ahead, John.
So many of the things that we've been talking about, these are all trends, that the telemedicine trend, we've experienced that ourselves in our home, and it really was a positive experience. Is there any? But that's a kind of a surprise, I guess, for some segments of the population. Is there anything you're seeing in the data that is genuinely has really taken you by surprise? Something that doesn't necessarily fit in the same kind of motif as, well, once you reflect upon it, it makes sense, or something that really has come out of left field that you didn't anticipate?
Yeah, I mean, left field maybe not. Unfortunately, we tend to, even the things that I'm most cynical about are sadly just tend to be reinforced over and over again, which is bothersome. And a lot of that is the sort of, well, for one, I mean, I certainly was surprised that the president wasn't able to fill an arena with 19,000 people. I was surprised, and frankly,
he was pretty surprised by that too.
Yeah, he was. And I was warmed by the fact that this group of people that frankly I've had a cynical view of in terms of their attitudes about the safety and the ignorance to the mask wearing and so on, still, when push came to shove, they valued safety over economic or whatever normalcy they were looking for. Mm-hmm. And that gave, and we're seeing that, I guess what maybe seems a little counterintuitive, the one thing we know about urban areas where this virus has hit the hardest, at least until now, you've got a generally more liberal and more minority group of people in those densely populated urban areas. They have been both hit hardest by the economic consequences of this virus and the health impact of this virus. And, they are the ones at the ground zero of that social experiment, Tony, that you mentioned, where they're the ones who are confronting the realities of economic hardship and health and safety at the same time. And they're choosing health and safety over economic. And I think there's some virtue to that, right? I'm glad that people are making that choice. But one of the questions when we look at the job market questions that we ask people sort of, are you ready to go back to work? And we cross that by people who are either working remotely or have lost their jobs because of COVID. The people who've lost their jobs because of COVID are the least likely to be in a hurry to go back. Now, there's a small group of those people that you would cynically say, well, because they're making more money from unemployment benefits than they would if they were in their current job. But when we normalize for that, it's still that group of people, probably because they've left jobs that they know if they go back to, they would be unsafe, right? Waiting tables at a restaurant or what have you. And so I guess if I were surprised by anything, it was maybe some of the uplifting nature of that. Not that we should be grateful that these people fear for their safety, but that they're choosing health and safety over economic well-being. And that's, I think, the way we should be, right?
Absolutely.
So,
John, I have to tell you, there's not a week that doesn't go by that I don't get like some insight from the work you guys are doing. It's really amazing on companies, brands, attitudes, help people's views on the future and how they're thinking about things. And stay with us for the last segment, and we'll sign up. But thanks for joining us. Thanks for that, diving into that with us today. Yep. We'll take a break here and come back on the Macrocast.
Markets Policy Partners provides sophisticated financial market analysis that is independent, accessible, and actionable for a broad audience. Learn more at marketspolicy.com or visit them on Twitter @marketspolicy.
All right, back with the Macrocast. Guys, take a look at next week. We have an odd jobs day next week coming because of the 4th of July holiday. It's gonna be Jobs Day Thursday. We're gonna bring you the Macrocast on Thursday too, because we're all gonna take Friday off. What else we have, Brendan?
Yeah, so obviously the jobs is always the biggest one, and I mean trying to collect data like that is always very difficult. So we'll see what it is, whether it's 0 or negative or 1 million, who knows. And then also China releases.
Have we seen estimates on or forecasts on that yet?
Right now it's about 3 million new jobs, and the unemployment rate to drop from 13.3 to 12.5.
Okay.
But also, I mean, the claims number came out yesterday, so it takes people a little bit to revise. So I would imagine with that claims number, as we get closer next week, we'll see that revised to be less jobs added.
Yeah.
And then China releases 2 of their big PMI data. In the US, we get the FOMC minutes, and then also on Monday, we get the second step to the Fed stress test, where each individual bank gets their scorecard.
We'll keep an eye out for for those, but the jobs report will be really, we have had now 2 in a row, just fascinating job reports that have been confounding for one reason or another.
Yeah.
I have to think this one will be too. We just don't know what the surprises are going to be in it, but we'll definitely learn something from it. All right, so we'll look forward to next week. I want to really just thank John Dick for joining us today. It's John Dick with CivicScience. Really appreciate it. Appreciate your insights. Definitely want to have you back. If you guys are looking for his work, and I highly encourage you to do it, go to the website www.civicscience.com. Check them out on Twitter at CivicScience. They're really easy to find. Amazing company doing really, really terrific work on understanding the way people think about things. So definitely check them out. John Fagan, Brendan Walsh, have a great weekend. We'll see you all next week. Thanks for listening to the Macrocast.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Macrocast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and share.